Hey, welcome to Vice Grip Garage. I'm your unreliable host, Derek. The old finger remover 4000. Extra CFMs. No, they actually approved.
Derek Bieri built Vice Grip Garage from nothing into a YouTube empire that inspired millions to wrench on forgotten cars. His authentic passion and down-to-earth approach made him a hero in the DIY automotive world. Then everything exploded. Federal agents, stolen vehicles, forged documents, and a partner who vanished without a trace. The man who saved rusty classics from junkyards now faced charges that got him sentenced to life imprisonment. How does someone go from restoring hope to losing freedom?
Rear drum overhaul, yes! Rear wheel cylinders.
The answer reveals a story darker and more twisted than anyone imagined. A cautionary tale about trust, betrayal, and justice gone terribly wrong. Early life and meteoric rise. Derek Bieri never planned to become famous. He was just a guy who loved cars and hated seeing them rot away in fields. Before YouTube ever knew his name, Derek worked as an auto technician in small-town Minnesota. The job paid the bills, but crushed his spirit. Corporate rules, endless paperwork, and customers who only cared about the cheapest fix possible wore him down year after year. He climbed the ladder into management, thinking a desk job might offer relief. Instead, it felt like a cage. The further he got from actual wrenches and engines, the more miserable he became. In 2018, Derek made a decision that would change everything. He walked away from the corporate world and returned to what he loved most: bringing dead cars back to life. He didn't have a fancy shop or expensive equipment. His garage was a gravel driveway, a basic toolbox, and whatever he could borrow from friends. Most people would have seen limitations. Derek saw freedom. He started filming himself rescuing abandoned vehicles from barns, fields, and forgotten storage lots. The concept was beautifully simple. Find a car that hasn't run in decades, figure out what's wrong, fix it on the spot, and drive it home. No scripts, no manufactured drama, just honest problem-solving and genuine enthusiasm. His camera work was shaky, his editing was rough. None of that mattered. People connected with the authenticity immediately. The Vice Grip Garage channel grew faster than anyone expected. Within months, thousands of subscribers were tuning in to watch Derek coax life back into vehicles that most mechanics would have sent straight to the scrapyard. He explained everything he did in plain language, making complex repairs feel accessible to ordinary people. He celebrated small victories and laughed at his mistakes. Viewers didn't just watch his videos, they felt like they were right there in the driveway with him. By 2020, Derek had crossed 1 million subscribers. The milestone felt surreal to someone who started with nothing but a phone camera and a dream. But he didn't slow down. If anything, the success pushed him harder. The channel kept climbing. 2 million subscribers arrived by 2024, cementing Derek's status as one of the most influential voices in the DIY automotive world. Major sponsors started calling. Motor Trend, one of the biggest names in automotive media, offered him a television partnership. Derek Bieri had gone from a burned-out corporate employee to a national figure inspiring millions of people to pick up wrenches and tackle projects they never thought possible. But success at that level attracts attention from all directions, not all of it good. The same visibility that brought opportunities also created vulnerabilities. When you become the face of an empire built on trust and authenticity, you become the target when that trust gets shattered. And Derek was about to make a decision that would put everything he built directly in the crosshairs of forces he never saw coming. What seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime was actually the beginning of his nightmare. The fateful vintage car investment. Derek and a small group of trusted friends had been talking for months about expanding Vice Grip Garage into something bigger. The YouTube channel was thriving, but they all saw potential for more. They wanted to create a full television series focused on restoring classic American cars, the kind of vehicles that told stories about different eras of automotive history. It would be expensive and ambitious, but with Derek's audience and Motor Trend's backing, it felt achievable. Then the opportunity arrived. A collector in the Midwest was selling off a massive lot of vintage cars. Dozens of vehicles from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Chevrolets, Fords, Chryslers, some in decent shape, others barely recognizable as cars anymore. The seller wanted to move everything in one transaction. It was exactly what Derek's team had been searching for. Enough project vehicles to fuel an entire season of content, maybe more. Derek and his partners pooled their resources and made the investment. The numbers were significant, but manageable with their combined funds and projected sponsorship money. They flew out to inspect the lot, walking through rows of automotive history covered in dust and rust. Every car represented a potential episode, a restoration story, a piece of American culture saved from the scrapyard. The excitement was electric. This wasn't just a business expansion, it was the realization of a dream they'd been building toward for years. The paperwork got complicated fast. Multiple people were investing, but someone needed to be the primary name on all the documents. Derek, as the public face and primary driver of the project, agreed to handle that role. His signature went on purchase agreements, transfer documents, and insurance forms. His name became the official owner of record for the entire collection. Everyone trusted each other completely. They were friends working toward a shared vision. Nobody thought twice about the legal implications. Logistics came next. The cars needed to be transported from the seller's property to a secure location where restoration work could begin. Derek's team hired transport companies, coordinated schedules, and documented everything for potential behind-the-scenes content. Sponsors were briefed on the project's scope. Media outlets started running preview pieces about Vice Grip Garage's ambitious new direction. Industry publications called it a landmark deal that could reshape automotive restoration television. Everything was moving forward exactly as planned. The vehicles arrived over several weeks. Each delivery brought fresh excitement and new discoveries. Some cars were better than expected. Original paint, still visible under decades of grime. Engines that might actually turn over with some work. Others were worse. Frames rotted through, interiors destroyed by rodents, parts stripped and sold off years earlier. But that was part of the adventure. Derek had built his entire reputation on tackling impossible projects. His audience would eat this up. Then came the phone call that changed everything. A routine background check on one of the vehicles revealed something deeply wrong. The car's VIN number matched a theft report filed in another state years earlier. The vehicle had been stolen, and somehow it had ended up in the lot Derek just purchased. Investigators started asking questions. They wanted to see documentation proving legitimate ownership transfer. Derek provided everything he had: bills of sale, title documents, transfer paperwork. All of it looked official and complete. Except it wasn't. Forensic document analysis revealed that the title for the stolen vehicle had been expertly forged. And not just forged recently. The fake documents had been created years ago and passed through multiple transactions, picking up legitimacy with each transfer. By the time Derek bought the car, the paperwork trail looked completely clean to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But federal investigators knew exactly what they were looking at: a sophisticated stolen vehicle operation that had been running for years. The FBI opened a formal investigation. They didn't just look at the one stolen car, they examined every vehicle in Derek's collection. More problems surfaced. Several other cars had questionable documentation. Some VIN numbers didn't match factory records. Others had title histories that went cold or contradicted themselves. What looked like a clean business transaction was actually riddled with fraud that predated Derek's involvement by years. Then the partner who had handled most of the title paperwork disappeared, just vanished. Phone numbers disconnected, social media deleted, forwarding addresses leading nowhere. Derek suddenly found himself as the only person left standing, his name on every single document, facing questions from federal investigators who specialized in auto theft rings. The media caught wind of the story within days. Headlines started appearing. YouTube star caught in stolen car scandal. The narrative was already being written, and Derek was being cast as the villain. But the real architect of the fraud had already slipped away, leaving Derek holding all the evidence and none of the answers. Crisis unfolds. The investigation moved fast and hit from every direction at once. FBI agents arrived at Derek's property with search warrants. State police seized his computers, phones, and filing cabinets full of business records. A multi-state auto theft task force started combing through years of vice grip garage transactions, looking for patterns and connections. Every vehicle Derek had ever purchased, restored, or featured in a video came under scrutiny. Investigators analyzed metadata from thousands of photos and videos, tracking when cars appeared, where they came from, and who handled them. Derek's entire digital footprint became evidence in a federal case he never saw coming. The public destruction started even faster than the legal problems. Someone leaked details from the investigation to automotive forums and social media groups. Within hours, the story exploded across the internet. People who had never heard of Vice Grip Garage suddenly had strong opinions about Derek's guilt. The comments sections turned vicious. Former fans felt betrayed and lashed out with anger that came from disappointment. Critics who had always resented Derek's success saw their chance to pile on. The nuance of the situation, that he might have been scammed himself, got buried under waves of outrage and speculation. Media outlets smelled blood in the water. Old Vice Grip garage footage got edited and recontextualized to make innocent moments look suspicious. A video of Derek laughing while picking up a car suddenly became evidence of someone who knew what he was doing. Clips of him negotiating prices got spun as proof of criminal intent. Entertainment news shows ran segments questioning how anyone could be so naive, implying that Derek must have known he was dealing with stolen vehicles. Rival YouTubers and industry competitors who had spent years watching Derek's meteoric rise couldn't resist the opportunity. Some made response videos expressing concern while carefully avoiding actual accusations, just raising questions and letting their audiences draw conclusions. Others were more direct, calling Derek a fraud and demanding he lose everything he'd built. A few creators who had collaborated with Vice Grip Garage in the past quickly deleted those videos and issued statements distancing themselves from Derek. Nobody wanted to be associated with the scandal. The financial collapse came next, and it was brutal. Major sponsors pulled their contracts within days of the investigation going public. Companies that had paid premium rates to be featured in Vice Grip Garage content suddenly wanted nothing to do with the brand. The Motor Trend television deal went into immediate suspension pending the investigation's outcome. Derek's investment partners faced their own nightmare. Money they had pooled together for the classic car project was now frozen as evidence. The friendships that had seemed unbreakable began fracturing under the pressure of financial loss and legal jeopardy. Then the situation turned genuinely dangerous. Someone doxed Derek's home address and posted it across multiple platforms. His family started receiving threats, angry messages, disturbing packages, phone calls at all hours. People drove past their house filming videos for social media clout. Local news crews camped outside hoping to catch footage of Derek looking guilty or scared. Within 2 weeks, Derek moved his family out of their home and into temporary housing at an undisclosed location. His wife stopped posting on social media entirely. His children had to switch schools mid-semester. The community that had once celebrated Derek Bieri became divided and confused. Longtime fans struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the accusations flying everywhere. Some remained loyal, arguing that Derek was clearly being set up. Others felt stupid for ever trusting him, convinced that the entire Vice Grip Garage brand had been built on lies. Car shows and meetups that Derek had planned to attend canceled his appearances. Derek's lawyers told him to stay silent, to let them handle everything, to not feed the media circus. But staying silent made him look guilty to millions of people who wanted explanations. Every day without a response felt like an admission. Derek watched everything he had spent years building crumble in real time while being legally advised to say nothing and do nothing. He was trapped in a nightmare where the truth seemed to matter less than the narrative. The worst part was knowing that somewhere out there, the person who had actually orchestrated the fraud was watching Derek's destruction and sleeping just fine. Trial and conviction. The trial started 18 months after the initial investigation began. By then, Derek had lost almost everything except his legal team and a shrinking circle of supporters who still believed in his innocence. The prosecution came prepared with a case built on overwhelming documentation. They presented a mountain of evidence that all pointed back to Derek's name on every transaction, every title transfer, every piece of paperwork connected to the stolen vehicles. His digital signature appeared hundreds of times across documents that the government claimed proved he was running a sophisticated vehicle fraud operation. The prosecutors painted Derek as a con artist who had built his entire YouTube persona as cover for criminal activity. They argued that Vice Grip Garage wasn't really about restoring cars. It was about creating a legitimate-looking business that could move stolen vehicles through the system without raising suspicion. Every feel-good video about saving a barn find became evidence of someone establishing credibility to hide darker intentions. The government's lawyers were skilled at taking Derek's own content and twisting it into something sinister. The most damaging evidence came from the vehicles themselves. Forensic investigators had traced multiple cars in Derek's collection back to theft reports filed years earlier across different states. The VIN numbers had been altered on some vehicles. Others had completely fabricated documentation that looked real enough to fool casual inspection, but fell apart under expert analysis. The prosecution showed the jury detailed charts connecting Derek's purchases to a network of stolen vehicle transactions that stretched back almost a decade. Then came the testimonies that sealed Derek's fate. His former partner, the one who had disappeared when the investigation started, suddenly reappeared as a witness for the prosecution. He had cut a deal with federal prosecutors in exchange for testifying against Derek. He claimed that Derek had been the mastermind behind everything, that he had recruited others to help move stolen cars, and that he had specifically chosen vehicles that would be hard to trace. The partner painted himself as a naive helper who only realized too late what Derek was really doing. Another colleague came forward with her own testimony. She claimed she had warned Derek multiple times that some of the paperwork looked suspicious. She said Derek had laughed off her concerns and told her not to worry about details. She testified that Derek had specifically told her to focus on content creation and let him handle the business side. Her testimony made Derek look like someone who knowingly ignored red flags because he was profiting too much to care. The courtroom became a public spectacle. News cameras lined up outside every morning. The gallery filled with a strange mix of Derek's remaining supporters wearing Vice Grip Garage merchandise and angry former fans who wanted to watch him pay for betraying their trust. The trial became entertainment for people following along online, dissecting every day's testimony on forums and social media. Legal analysts appeared on television explaining why Derek's defense strategy wasn't working. The automotive industry watched closely, knowing the verdict would send a message about accountability in their world. Derek's defense team tried to argue that he was a victim of the same fraud that had fooled law enforcement for years. They pointed to the missing partner's sudden disappearance as proof that someone else had orchestrated everything. They brought in character witnesses who testified about Derek's integrity and passion for legitimate automotive restoration. But none of it mattered against the weight of documentation with Derek's name on it. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Derek Bieri to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His assets were immediately frozen. Vice Grip Garage content was pulled from multiple platforms pending legal review. The man who had inspired millions to fix cars and chase dreams was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, while cameras captured every moment. But buried in the case files was evidence that nobody had bothered to examine. Evidence that would eventually prove Derek had been telling the truth all along. The second buyer who saw the same forgeries. 3 months after Derek's sentencing, a man named Robert Callahan came forward with a story that nobody in law enforcement wanted to hear. Callahan lived in Ohio and had no connection to Derek Bieri or Vice Grip Garage. He had simply been following the trial coverage out of curiosity because he was a classic car enthusiast. When he saw photos of the forged title documents presented as evidence against Derek, something clicked in his memory. He had seen those exact same forgeries before, years earlier when he had almost made the same mistake Derek did. Callahan contacted Derek's legal team and told them about an incident from 2015. He had been negotiating to buy a vintage Chevrolet from a seller who operated through online classifieds and word-of-mouth referrals. The deal seemed legitimate at first. The car was beautiful, the price was reasonable, and the seller provided complete documentation including title, registration history, and bill of sale. Everything looked official and properly notarized. Callahan was ready to complete the purchase until something small made him pause. A slightly misaligned seal on one of the documents that just looked wrong. He took the paperwork to a DMV office and asked them to verify everything before he handed over cash. The clerk noticed inconsistencies immediately. The notary stamp didn't match official records. The title had been printed on paper stock that wasn't used during the year the car was supposedly registered. Someone had created incredibly convincing forgeries, but they weren't quite perfect. The documents Callahan brought to authorities in 2015 were the same style, format, and forgery technique as the ones that later appeared in Derek's case. They came from the same operation. Callahan did everything right. He filed a police report with his local department, turned over all the forged documents as evidence, and provided the seller's contact information. He expected investigators to pursue the case aggressively. Instead, nothing happened. The report was filed and forgotten. No detective followed up with him. No investigation was launched into the seller or the forgery operation. The fake documents sat in an evidence locker somewhere collecting dust, while the fraud network continued operating for another 7 years, right up until Derek bought those cars. This revelation was devastating for multiple reasons. It proved that Derek had stumbled into a pre-existing criminal operation that had been running successfully for years. The forged documents didn't originate with Derek or his team. They were created by professionals who had been scamming buyers long before Vice Grip Garage even existed. More importantly, It showed that law enforcement had been warned about this exact fraud scheme years earlier and had done absolutely nothing to stop it. If Callahan's report had been properly investigated in 2015, Derek would never have encountered those stolen vehicles in 2022. Derek's attorneys immediately filed motions for a new trial based on this newly discovered evidence. They argued that the prosecution's entire theory of Derek as the mastermind made no sense when the same forgeries had been circulating years before his involvement. Independent journalists started digging into how many other buyers might have encountered the same fraud operation. They found at least 4 other cases across 3 states where people had reported suspicious vehicle documentation that matched the pattern. None of those reports had triggered serious investigations either. The classic car community erupted with fresh outrage, this time directed at the justice system that had railroaded Derek while ignoring the actual criminals. Supporters who had stayed quiet during the trial came forward demanding that prosecutors re-examine the case. Legal experts who reviewed Callahan's evidence said it raised serious questions about whether Derek had been prosecuted simply because he was the most visible target rather than the most guilty party. The real architects of the fraud had hidden behind multiple layers of transactions, letting Derek's fame and documentation make him the perfect fall guy. But getting a new trial would require convincing the same system that had already declared Derek guilty to admit it might have been catastrophically wrong. Aftermath and ripple effects. Derek's family disappeared from public life almost immediately after the sentencing. His wife changed her name legally and moved with their children to a different state where nobody recognized them. The kids enrolled in new schools under their mother's maiden name. Old friends and neighbors were instructed never to share information about their whereabouts. The family that had once been comfortable sharing their lives through social media now lived in constant fear of being found by angry strangers who believed Derek had betrayed the automotive community. They became ghosts, erased from the world they once knew. The people who had worked with Derek faced their own brutal consequences. His cameraman lost his house trying to pay legal bills after being questioned repeatedly by investigators. A longtime collaborator, who had appeared in dozens of Vice Grip Garage videos, moved to Canada to escape the association with the scandal. Several friends who had invested in the classic car project filed for bankruptcy when their frozen assets couldn't be recovered. One business partner became so depressed by the financial and reputational damage that he abandoned the automotive industry entirely and took a job in construction just to start over with a clean slate. Major brands that had sponsored Vice Grip Garage content launched their own internal investigations to determine if they had unknowingly promoted criminal activity. Legal teams combed through every contract, every product placement, every dollar that had changed hands. Some companies faced shareholder lawsuits from investors who claimed the Derek Bieri scandal had damaged brand value. Marketing executives who had championed the Vice Grip Garage partnership found their judgment questioned and their careers stalled. The entire influencer marketing sector experienced a chilling effect as companies became terrified of backing the wrong creator. The classic car market itself suffered from widespread paranoia and distrust. Buyers became suspicious of every transaction, demanding excessive documentation and third-party verification for even routine purchases. Sellers got offended by the implication that their paperwork might be fraudulent. Legitimate deals fell apart because neither party could fully trust the other anymore. Values dropped on certain makes and models that had been featured in Derek's collection. Insurance companies raised premiums for classic vehicles, citing increased fraud risk. The enthusiasm and joy that had defined the hobby got replaced by fear and constant second-guessing. Academic researchers and media analysts found Derek's story irresistible as a case study. Universities teaching courses on digital culture, parasocial relationships, and modern celebrity used the Vice Grip Garage collapse as a primary example of how quickly public perception can flip. Papers were published analyzing the speed and ferocity of Derek's cancellation. Documentaries were planned examining how someone with millions of supporters could be destroyed so thoroughly in just months. Derek became a cautionary tale taught to aspiring content creators. Build your empire carefully, because the same visibility that makes you famous makes you vulnerable. But Robert Callahan's revelation about the earlier forgeries changed the conversation dramatically. Independent journalists who specialized in wrongful conviction cases picked up the story and started investigating aggressively. They found more victims of the same fraud ring, people who had reported suspicious documents years before Derek's case and been ignored by authorities. Online communities that had once celebrated Derek's conviction started questioning whether justice had actually been served. Petitions circulated demanding a formal reinvestigation. Former prosecutors appeared on podcasts admitting the case deserved another look. The movement for Derek's exoneration grew slowly but steadily. Legal advocacy groups took interest in the case as an example of how law enforcement failures can destroy innocent lives. Documentary filmmakers interviewed Callahan and other witnesses who had tried to warn authorities about the forgery operation. New evidence kept surfacing, more ignored police reports, more victims, more proof that Derek had walked into a trap that had been set long before he arrived. The narrative was shifting from Derek as criminal mastermind to Derek as the most visible victim of a system that failed everyone involved. Meanwhile, Derek sat in a maximum security prison, watching strangers fight for justice he couldn't fight for himself, wondering if truth actually mattered when it arrived too late. Final reflection. The Derek Bieri story refuses to reach a satisfying conclusion because the truth remains scattered across ignored police reports, missing witnesses, and unanswered questions. It stands as a stark warning about what happens when blind trust meets legal vulnerability in the age of social media prosecution. Derek trusted his partners. He trusted the paperwork. He trusted that doing everything publicly would protect him from accusations of wrongdoing. Every assumption proved catastrophically wrong. The media frenzy that destroyed him revealed something disturbing about modern justice. The court of public opinion moved faster and hit harder than any legal proceeding. Derek was convicted in millions of minds before a jury ever heard evidence. The same platforms that built his empire became weapons that tore it down within days. Fame that took years to build evaporated in hours, replaced by a narrative that cared more about drama than truth. Derek's legacy remains complicated and painful. To some, he's still the inspiring figure who proved that passion and persistence could overcome any obstacle. To others, he's a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting too easily and moving too fast. Most people just remember him as the guy who went to prison, the details blurred by time and competing narratives. But Robert Callahan's emergence as the second buyer adds a layer that cannot be ignored. His evidence proves that ignored warnings and overlooked crimes directly enabled Derek's downfall. It suggests that the real criminals are still out there, probably running the same schemes, while Derek pays the price for law enforcement failures that predated his involvement by years. The final truth is uncomfortable. Justice remains incomplete until every overlooked piece comes to light. Until the authorities who ignored Callahan's warnings are held accountable. Until the missing partner faces consequences. Until the system admits it destroyed a man who may have been guilty of nothing more than terrible timing and trusting the wrong people. Until then, Derek Bieri's story is just another reminder that sometimes the truth matters less than who gets blamed first. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.